You are 19 or maybe 23, and you are staring at your banking app at 11 at night, and the number on the screen says something like $4,200, and for a moment you feel something close to pride because you did this. You saved it yourself. One paycheck at a time, skipping things, saying no to things, and there it sits. Safe, untouched, growing at a rate so small it barely deserves the name. And somewhere underneath the pride, there is a quieter feeling you don't have a name for yet. A kind of restlessness, because some part of you already suspects that this money, sitting exactly where it is not actually doing what you think it's doing. And you close the app and you go to sleep, and you tell yourself that saving is the responsible thing, the mature thing, the thing your parents told you to do, and technically they were right. And yet, something still feels unfinished, like you climbed the first step of a staircase and then just stood there, waiting for the rest of the stairs to appear on their own. That feeling is the entire subject of this video, because what you are sensing, without yet having the language for it, is the difference between saving money and putting money to work. And almost nobody explains that difference clearly, because the financial industry benefits when you stay confused about it, and your school never taught it. And your parents may not have fully understood it either, so you inherited a habit. Save, 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 without ever inheriting the second half of the instruction, which is that saving is only step one, and step one alone is not enough to build the life you're picturing when you imagine yourself 10 years from now. Here is the concept underneath all of this, stated plainly. A savings account is a place where money is stored. An investment is a place where money is put to work. Storage protects money from being spent carelessly today. Work grows money so that it becomes more valuable across time. Both have a purpose, and neither one replaces the other. But the mistake almost everyone makes in their 20s is treating the storage account as if it were the whole plan, when in reality, it was only ever meant to be the entry point. To understand why this distinction matters so much, it helps to look at what is actually happening to money while it sits in a savings account. Prices rise every year, gradually, almost invisibly, a process economists call inflation, and historically, that rise has averaged somewhere in the range of 2 to 3% annually, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on the decade. Most savings accounts pay an interest rate that is close to that number, or sometimes below it, which means the money is not really growing in any meaningful sense. It is simply keeping pace with rising prices, or, in many years, quietly losing ground to them. The number on the screen goes up, but what that number can actually buy stays flat or even shrinks. This is not a flaw in the system that someone forgot to fix. It is simply how a savings account is designed to function, as a place of safety, not a place of growth. Now, here is where psychology enters the picture, because if the math is this straightforward, the obvious question is why more people don't act on it sooner. And the answer has less to do with intelligence and more to do with how the human brain is wired to respond to risk. When money sits in a savings account, it feels safe, because the number never goes down, and the brain associates a stable number with safety, even when that stability is an illusion caused by inflation working slowly in the background. Investing, on the other hand, involves a number that moves, sometimes up, sometimes down, and that visible movement triggers something called loss aversion, a well-documented tendency in behavioral economics, where the pain of losing money feels roughly twice as intense as the pleasure of gaining the same amount. So even when a person understands intellectually that investing tends to build wealth over long periods of time, their emotional system still flinches at the idea of watching a number dip, even temporarily. And that flinch is often enough to keep people frozen in the comfort of a savings account for years longer than they intended. Alongside this sits present bias, the tendency to weigh immediate comfort more heavily than future benefit, which is the reason it feels easier to leave $4,000 sitting untouched than to spend an afternoon setting up something new, because the discomfort of learning is immediate and certain, while the benefit of investing is distant and abstract. Now let's look at what these two paths actually produce over time, because the math here is not dramatic. It does not require guessing at outcomes. It simply requires patience, and patience is the one ingredient this entire subject depends on. Imagine two versions of the same person, starting at the same age with the same $4,000. One version keeps that money in a savings account, earning close to nothing after inflation is accounted for. The other version moves that same money into a diversified, long-term investment, something broad and unglamorous, and simply leaves it alone, adding a little more when possible for 20 or 30 years. Historically, diversified stock market investments held over multi-decade periods have produced average annual growth in the range of 7% after inflation, though it's worth being honest that this number is a long-term historical average, not a guarantee, and any individual stretch of years can look very different from the average. Even so, the structural difference between the two paths is enormous, because growth compounds, meaning the returns from early years start generating their own returns in later years, quietly snowballing in the background while the saver's account barely moves. It's worth zooming out here, because this isn't just a personal decision playing out in isolated bank accounts. It's a pattern shaped by a much larger system. The financial industry and much of consumer culture around it is built in a way that makes spending frictionless and investing slightly inconvenient. Buying something requires one tap. Historically, access to investing was also gated by wealth itself. Brokers required large minimums. Information was harder to access, and entire generations were effectively locked out of markets that quietly compounded for those already inside them. That gate has loosened significantly in the last 2 decades, with low-cost, low-minimum investment platforms becoming widely available. But the psychological gate, the discomfort, the unfamiliarity, the sense that investing is not for people like me, often remains standing long after the financial gate has opened. So let's actually walk through what moving from saving to investing looks like in practice, in order, the way it would unfold if you were the one doing it this month rather than someday. The first step is building a small cushion before anything else moves. This means setting aside enough saved money, usually equal to a few months of essential expenses, and keeping that portion in an easily accessible savings account rather than investing it, because investments can lose value in the short term. And this cushion exists so you are never forced to sell an investment at a bad moment, simply because an unexpected expense showed up. The second step is opening an actual investment account, separate from your regular bank account, through a licensed brokerage platform. For most people starting out today, this process takes less time than setting up a new phone. It usually involves an application, identity verification, and linking a bank account, and it typically requires no special certification or minimum wealth to begin. The third step is deciding what portion of your remaining savings, beyond the emergency cushion, gets moved into that account, and then actually moving it, deliberately, as a single decision rather than something left for later. This is usually the step where present bias does the most damage, so treating it as a defined task with a specific day attached to it tends to matter more than any amount of research beforehand. The fourth step is choosing what to actually invest in. And for most people starting out, this means favouring broad diversified funds rather than individual companies, because diversification spreads risk across many businesses instead of concentrating it in one. And because consistently picking which single company will outperform the market is notoriously difficult, even for professionals who do it full-time. The fifth step is setting up automatic recurring contributions, even small ones, so that investing becomes a scheduled habit rather than a decision you have to remake every month. Consistency across years tends to matter more to the final outcome than the size of any individual contribution. And the sixth step, the one that outlasts all the others, is simply staying in the account and resisting the urge to react when the number moves downward, because it will, at some point, move downward. And that movement is not a sign that something has gone wrong. It is simply what markets do on their way to producing long-term growth. The people who benefit most from this system are rarely the ones who timed anything perfectly. They are the ones who stayed. What changes underneath all 6 of these steps is not just a number in an account, but an identity. The version of you that only saves sees money as something to be protected and rationed. The version of you that invests starts to see money as something that can work on your behalf, quietly in the background, while you go on living your actual life. That shift in identity tends to matter more than any specific strategy, because once you see yourself as someone who invests, the decisions that follow, contributing a little more, staying calm during a downturn, thinking in years instead of weekends, start to feel natural rather than forced. None of this promises a specific outcome, and anyone who tells you it does is selling you something. Markets fluctuate, timelines vary, individual circumstances differ. What history does show consistently is that the earlier someone moves through these steps, from cushion to account to contribution to diversification to consistency to patience, the more time compounding has to work quietly in their favor. And time, more than any clever strategy, has always been the real asset. So the next time you open your banking app and look at that number sitting there, safe and unmoving, the question worth asking isn't whether you've saved enough. It's whether that money is finally ready to start working the same way you did to earn it.